Hi, I am Sophia. Welcome to True Payback, where story hits, different hits subscribe. Let's dive in.
The day Marcus filed his complaint, I was holding a cup of green tea that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. I hadn't drunk it. I'd been standing at the window on the 14th floor of Vantage Group's headquarters, watching the city below move through its ordinary Tuesday morning. Taxis cutting lanes, a food cart vendor arguing cheerfully with a businessman, pigeons doing what pigeons do, and thinking about something my mentor James had said to me 6 years ago, the week after my mother's funeral. The people who dismiss you the loudest, he'd said, pouring bad coffee into a paper cup in a hospital break room, because that's where we'd been when she died, are always the ones who need you most. Remember that. Don't let it make you bitter. Let it make you patient. I tried. Most days I succeeded. Today was being tested. My name is Diana Osei. I am 38 years old. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Vantage Group, a mid-market technology consultancy that has grown, in the 6 years since its founding, from 12 employees operating out of a converted warehouse in Pittsburgh to a 300-person firm with offices in 4 cities and a client list that includes 2 federal agencies, a Fortune 100 healthcare company, and a regional bank consortium that controls approximately $40 billion in managed assets. I hold a 31% equity stake in that company. I helped build it from nothing. My name is on the founding documents, on the partnership agreement, on the original lease for that warehouse, and on the wall in the lobby downstairs in letters I specifically asked to be made smaller than my co-founders because he'd started the idea and that mattered to me. My brother Marcus does not know any of this. He knows me as his younger sister. The quiet one. The one who took the bus to work for years while he drove a leased Audi he couldn't quite afford. The one who brought groceries to our mother's house every Sunday without being asked and without being thanked. The one who, at every family gathering from our cousin Bree's quinceanera to last Christmas, was referred to in the collective family shorthand as Diana, the one who works in tech. The word works doing a great deal of heavy lifting, implying something mid-level and unremarkable. He did not know, and I had not told him, because there was a period of 4 years where I genuinely tried to build a bridge with Marcus and he burned every plank I handed him. At some point you stop handing over wood. Let me go back further, because the story doesn't start at the complaint desk. It starts in a kitchen. Our parents, Arthur and Gloria Osei, immigrated from Ghana in 1981 with 2 suitcases, $1,000, and a shared conviction that education was the currency their children would use to buy a different life. They were not wrong. They were also, in the particular way of parents who fought hard for stability, somewhat rigid in their definitions of success. Marcus was the eldest. He was bright, charming, and very good at performing the version of success our parents recognized: grades, titles, offices with his name on the door. He became a sales director at a mid-size software company called Bridgefield Technologies at 32, and my parents treated this the way other families treat Olympic medals. My father called it proof that the sacrifice was worth it. My mother made jollof for 30 people. I was 4 years younger, quieter, and interested in things that didn't produce immediate, displayable results. I read systems architecture books for fun. I spent my weekends helping a non-profit digitize its case management. I took a job as a junior analyst at a consulting firm that nobody had heard of because it was doing genuinely interesting work restructuring public sector data systems, and I understood instinctively that the interesting work mattered more than the name recognition. My parents were, to put it gently, unimpressed. "Your brother has a corner office," my mother told me once when I was 27, sitting at the kitchen table while she cooked. She wasn't cruel about it. Gloria Osei was never cruel. She was matter-of-fact, which was in some ways harder. "I just want to understand your plan, Diana." "What is the plan?" I told her I was building toward something. She nodded the way people nod when they don't quite believe you but love you enough not to push. Marcus was less restrained. At my cousin Bree's wedding, this was 2016, I was 29, he pulled me aside at the reception and said, with the particular confidence of someone who has never been wrong in front of himself, you can leverage my name at Bridgefield if you want an interview. They're hiring analysts. You'd be good at it. Nothing senior, obviously, but a foot in the door." I was, at that precise moment, 2 months into co-founding Vantage Group. I said, "That's kind of you, Marcus. I think I'm okay." He shrugged and went back to the dance floor. He had already forgotten the conversation by the time he got there. I met James Calloway in 2015 at a municipal tech conference in Philadelphia. which is the kind of sentence that sounds boring until you understand what it produced. James was 44, a former CTO of a regional healthcare network, soft-spoken in the way that only people with real authority can afford to be, and the sharpest systems thinker I had ever encountered. We ended up in the same breakout session about legacy infrastructure modernization, and I asked a question that apparently nobody had asked him before in that context because he found me afterward at the coffee station and said simply, "That question. Tell me more about how you're thinking about that." We talked for 3 hours. We exchanged numbers. For months later, we were meeting every 2 weeks to develop a business concept. 8 months after that, we incorporated. The foundation of Vantage Group was this. Most mid-market organizations were being sold enterprise technology solutions they didn't need by firms that made money on complexity, not outcomes. James and I believed you could build a consultancy that charged for results, structured engagements around measurable transformation, and still made exceptional money doing it. We were right. James was the face. He had the network, the gray at the temple's credibility, and the kind of handshake that made CFOs feel safe. I was the architecture. I built the operational systems, managed delivery, recruited and trained the consultant teams, and developed the methodology that became our differentiator in the market. We agreed early to keep our partnership structure quiet. Not secret, exactly. It was in every document, every filing, every regulatory submission. But we didn't lead with it in pitches. James introduced me as his COO, which was accurate. The equity structure was background information that clients didn't need and competitors didn't deserve. The result was that most people who interacted with Vantage Group knew James as the founder and knew me as the extraordinarily effective woman who ran everything. What they did not always know was that I owned nearly a third of what they were buying into. I found I didn't mind. The work was what I cared about. The work was extraordinary. My mother died in March of 2019. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed late, progression rapid. She was 63. She died on a Thursday morning in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and the roses my Aunt Cecile had brought the day before. I was holding her left hand. Marcus was on the other side holding her right. In the weeks that followed, grief distributed itself through my family in the way grief always does, unequally and in shapes nobody predicted. My father became quiet and domestic in a way he'd never been, cooking elaborate meals for no one in particular. My Aunt Cecile flew in from Toronto and stayed for 3 weeks, organizing things that didn't need organizing because she needed to move. I went back to work after 10 days because the work was where I knew how to breathe. Marcus fell apart and then hardened around the break. He had been, I think, genuinely closer to our mother than I understood while she was alive. Her loss did something to him that I watched from a distance and couldn't reach. He became sharper-edged. The competitive comparisons he'd always made, the corner office remarks, the unsolicited career advice, the small corrections at family dinners, became something colder. Less fraternal performance, more actual contempt. The breaking point for me came at my father's birthday dinner that October. 7 months after we'd buried our mother. Marcus had organized it. A reservation at a nice restaurant downtown, our father's siblings, a few cousins, the immediate family. He had not asked me to contribute to the planning, which I registered but didn't comment on. Halfway through the meal he mentioned, casually to the table the way you mention something casual, that he'd been promoted to vice president of sales at Bridgefield. Everyone congratulated him. My father's face did something I hadn't seen it do since before my mother got sick. It opened. Then my Uncle Raymond asked, "Diana, what about you? What's new at work?" Before I could answer, Marcus said, "Diana's doing fine. Keeping the lights on." He smiled. Not at me. At the table. Keeping the lights on. My Aunt Cecile made a small sound. My father looked at his plate. I looked at Marcus for a long moment and he didn't look back, and I thought of what James had said in that hospital break room, and I folded my napkin on my lap and I said, "Yes. Things are good. The work is interesting." And I let it go. But something shifted in me that night. I had spent years keeping my professional life quiet to avoid exactly this kind of performance. The comparison, the diminishment, the family dinner as a competition I hadn't entered. Now I wondered if my silence had created the stage for it. If keeping myself small in family spaces had simply confirmed a story Marcus had been telling himself for years. I didn't decide to reveal anything. I'm not built that way. I decided to stop shrinking. I started wearing my full title on conference badges. I started, when asked at family events, giving actual answers instead of deflections. I mentioned at Christmas 2021 that Vantage had just closed our largest contract to date. I didn't give numbers. I didn't need to. Marcus started around this time making a different kind of remark. Less dismissive, more suspicious. Who exactly is running that company? He asked once at my cousin Bree's baby shower, not to me but near me. I did some research and I couldn't find much online about the leadership structure. I said, we keep a low profile. It works for us. He looked at me the way people look at something they don't understand and have decided to distrust. The situation that produced the complaint began as so many situations do with a job posting. Vantage Group had, in the fall of 2023, opened a Director of Client Strategy position in our Pittsburgh headquarters. It was a senior role, significant scope, meaningful compensation, reporting directly to our VP of Delivery. We posted it externally and began receiving applications. I did not know when our HR lead Priya pulled me into a brief conversation about an internal referral that the application she was describing belonged to my brother. The candidate has strong sales credentials, Priya told me, summarizing the file. Director level at Bridgefield Technologies for 2 years. The referring employee is, she checked her notes, David Mensa. He went to school with the applicant. David Mensa was one of our senior analysts. A good one. I looked at the application. I saw the name. I sat with it for a moment. I told Priya to process it through our standard evaluation pipeline and said nothing about the family connection. I recused myself from the hiring committee. I informed James, who raised an eyebrow, asked 2 questions and then said, your call on involvement. The process is the process. The process moved forward. Marcus passed the first 2 interview rounds. He was genuinely a strong candidate. His Bridgefield experience was directly relevant and his sales instincts were sharp. The hiring committee, which did not know he was my brother, ranked him second among 5 finalists. He did not get the job. A woman named Tanya Brewster, who had spent 4 years building client strategy programs at a larger consultancy in Chicago, ranked first. The committee's recommendation was unanimous. Marcus received a standard rejection email from Priya. 48 hours later, he was standing in our lobby. I knew he was there before anyone told me. My assistant, Keisha, appeared at my office door with the particular expression she reserves for situations that require delicacy, eyebrows slightly raised, mouth pressed into a diplomatic line, and said, Diana, there is a man at reception who says he's your brother. He's requesting to speak with leadership about a hiring decision. I looked at her. He used the phrase file a complaint 3 times in 2 minutes, she added. I closed the document I was reviewing. I'll come down. Do you want me to? No. Thank you, Keisha. I took the stairs. I do that sometimes when I need the 12 seconds to settle myself. The lobby of our Pittsburgh headquarters is not ostentatious, but it is not nothing either. The ceilings are high. The furniture is considered. There are 2 large framed photographs on the east wall. One of our first team of 12, taken in the warehouse in 2016, and one of our 300th employee receiving her offer letter last year. James insisted on that second one. He is sentimental in ways that make the company better. Marcus was standing at the reception desk, his back partially to the door. He was wearing his work clothes, the Bridgefield uniform of pressed shirt and blazer, and he was speaking with the focused energy of a man who has prepared his grievance carefully and is committed to delivering it. No transparency in the process, no feedback, and frankly the candidate they selected is less qualified by any objective measure. I need to speak to someone in actual authority here. Not HR. Someone who runs this company. Our receptionist, a young man named Felix who has the remarkable quality of appearing entirely unruffled in any circumstance, was nodding with professional patience. I stopped 6 feet away and said nothing. I put my hands in my jacket pockets and waited. Marcus heard something, a shift in the room's attention maybe, and turned. He saw me. His expression moved through surprise, then recalibration, then something that settled into a particular kind of confidence. The confidence of someone who thinks he has unexpectedly found an advantage. Diana. He almost smiled. Good. You can help me. I need to talk to whoever's in charge of hiring here. I applied for a position, I was rejected, and I'd like to understand the reasoning. I heard, I said. Right, so. The process is managed by our HR team. They can schedule a debrief. Priya handles. I don't want a debrief from HR. His voice sharpened. I want to talk to leadership. Real leadership. I have questions about the integrity of the evaluation process, and I think given that you work here, there may be a conflict of interest issue that was not disclosed properly. There was. The real complaint. He thought I had tanked him. Marcus. I'm serious, Diana. I'm not here as your brother right now. I'm here as a candidate who deserves an explanation. So either you take me to whoever is actually running this company or I'm going to reach out directly. I've already found the founder's contact information. He had found James's contact information. I looked at him for a moment. He was 38 inches away from a situation he could not imagine, standing in the lobby of a company whose founding documents had my name on them, demanding to speak to someone in charge. I took my hands out of my pockets. Hey, I said. Let me see if he's available. I pulled out my phone and sent James a text. 4 words. Lobby. When you can. His response came in 11 seconds. On my way. I looked at Felix, who had maintained his expression of perfect professional neutrality throughout. Felix, can you let Mr. Osei wait in the sitting area? Thank you. I walked to the window. I picked up the cup of green tea I'd left on the windowsill 20 minutes before. It had gone completely cold. I held it anyway and watched the city and thought about my mother's kitchen and the word patience and the way grief breaks people into shapes they don't recognize. Marcus sat in the sitting area for 4 minutes. I know because I counted. He checked his phone twice. He looked around the lobby once, taking it in the way people take in spaces they're deciding how to be impressed by. His eyes paused briefly on the photographs on the east wall. I watched him look at the warehouse photograph from 2016. I was in it. Second from the left, younger, laughing at something James had just said. The image is small. He didn't recognize me. The elevator opened. James Calloway does not enter a room the way powerful people sometimes do, with noise, with the expectation of turning heads. He walks the way he has always walked, which is calmly and with complete attention to wherever he's going. He was wearing a dark navy jacket over an open-collar shirt. His hair was more gray than it had been in 2015. He looked, as he always looks, like someone whose opinion you want. He stepped into the lobby. He looked toward the sitting area, toward Marcus, for exactly 1 second. Then he looked at me. He crossed the lobby and reached out his hand. There she is, he said. Ready for the board presentation, partner? The word landed in the room like a stone into water. I watched Marcus's face move through it. The first ripple was confusion, partner. Then the second was calculation, partner. And then the third was the slow, cold restructuring of everything he thought he understood about where he was standing and who he was standing across from. James, I said, my brother Marcus is here. He applied for the Director of Client Strategy role and would like to discuss the evaluation process. James turned to Marcus with the same expression he gives everyone. Open, attentive, unhurried. He extended his hand. Marcus. James Calloway. I co-founded Vantage with your sister. Marcus stood. He shook the hand. He was, I will give him this, not a man who fell apart visibly. He reassembled quickly. But his voice when he spoke had lost its earlier certainty. Yes. I had some questions about the hiring process. Of course. Let's sit. We moved to the meeting room adjacent to the lobby, glass-walled, visible to the floor, which was not incidental. I sat across from Marcus. James sat at the head of the table and folded his hands and gave my brother his complete attention, which is one of James's great gifts and in this context, also one of his most quietly devastating weapons. Tell me your concern, James said. Marcus told it well, actually. I'll grant him that. He laid out his reasoning, the strength of his application, the apparent qualifications gap between himself and the hired candidate, and his belief that my presence in the company created a structural conflict of interest that should have been disclosed. James listened without interrupting. I did the same. When Marcus finished, James nodded slowly. Then he said, 2 things. First, Diana recused herself from your evaluation process entirely. She disclosed the family connection to our HR lead and removed herself from the committee. Every decision made about your candidacy was made without her involvement. Marcus looked at me. I said nothing. Second, James continued, the candidate selected for the role has 4 years of direct experience building client strategy programs at scale. Your background is strong, genuinely. The committee ranked you second among 5 finalists. That's not a consolation. It's an accurate reflection of a close competition. Then why wasn't I told that? Marcus asked. Why didn't the rejection give any feedback? Because our standard rejections don't include ranking data. That's a policy I'd actually like to revisit. James said this without any deflection, and I recognized it as the thing I have always trusted most about him. When he's wrong about something, he says so. You could have requested a debrief. That's always available. Pause. I didn't know that, Marcus said. How you do. Another pause. Longer. Marcus looked at the table. Then at me. Then back at James. How long has she been your partner? Since the beginning. 6 years. She built the operational infrastructure of this company. The methodology our clients pay us for. That's Diana's work. She holds 31% equity. I watched Marcus process this the way you watch someone recalculate a long equation and arrive at a number they didn't expect. It moved across his face in stages. The math of 6 years, the math of 31%, the math of the warehouse photograph on the wall in the lobby where his younger sister had been standing second from the left, laughing before either of them knew what would be built from that moment. You never told me, he said to me. Not accusatory. Something closer to bewildered. No, I said. Why? I looked at him for a moment. There were several true answers to that question, and I chose the one that was most useful. Because every time I tried to tell you something about my work, you told me about your corner office. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. James stood. I'll let you two talk. Marcus, if you'd like a proper debrief on your application, Priya will make time this week. The feedback is genuinely constructive. I'd encourage you to take it. He nodded at me once, briefly, and left. The conversation that happened after James left is not one I will detail fully, because it belongs to the category of private things that families have to work out in private, and it was not clean. Marcus did not apologize that afternoon. I did not expect him to. What he did was sit very still for a long time and say eventually, I didn't know you were building something real. I know, I said. I thought. He stopped. Started again. Mom thought you were drifting. I know that too. He looked at the glass wall of the meeting room, at the lobby beyond it, at the east wall where the photographs were. Is that you? In that picture. Second from the left. He looked at it for another moment. You were 29. Yes. Bree's wedding was that year. Yes. He didn't say anything else about Bree's wedding. But I watched him remember what he'd said to me at that reception. The gracious offer of a junior analyst interview at Bridgefield, and I watched him sit with what that now meant. What it had always meant if he'd known. He left 20 minutes later. He shook my hand at the lobby door, which was formal and strange and somehow exactly right for where we were. The board presentation that afternoon went well. It was a quarterly review. Our 4 division heads, James, myself, and 2 outside board members who are old friends of James's from his CTO days. We presented the Q3 numbers, which were strong. We discussed the Chicago expansion timeline. I walked through the new federal contract we'd closed in September, a 3-year engagement that represented the largest single contract in our history. Afterward, over bad coffee in the conference room because the good coffee machine was being repaired, our VP of delivery, a meticulous woman named Sue Jean who had been with us since year 2, said to me, "You had a visitor this morning." "Hi, brother," I said. "I heard." She paused. "How are you?" It was the kind of question that Sue Jean asks rarely and means completely. I thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet," I said. She nodded. "Fair." That evening I called my father. He picked up on the second ring the way he always does, as if he's been expecting the call without knowing it was coming. We talked for 40 minutes, which is longer than our calls usually run. I told him about Marcus's visit. I told him for the first time the full shape of what I'd built. The 31%, the 300 employees, the federal contracts, the numbers. There was a long silence. Then my father said in a voice that carried something I hadn't heard in it since before my mother got sick, "Your mother knew." I went still. "What?" "Not the details. But she knew you were building something. She told me once, I think it was the year before she got sick, she said, "Arthur, Diana is going to surprise all of us." I told her you were too quiet about it for it to be much. She said. His voice shifted slightly. She said, "That's why." I didn't say anything for a moment. "I should have listened to her more," my father said. About a lot of things. She was usually right, I said. Yes, he said. She was. We stayed on the line together for a little while after that, not saying much, just present in the way that people who have lost the same person can be present together in the space that person left. Marcus called me 3 weeks later. He had taken the debrief with Priya. He said, found it useful. He had some questions about a role she'd mentioned might be opening in Q2. A different position, different scope, something that mapped better to his actual strengths. I told him I would send his file to Priya with a note. I did not tell him the note would say that I thought he deserved a fair shot, and that I would remove myself from any committee considering him, and that the process should treat him exactly as it would treat anyone else. I did not tell him this because it would have implied that a different standard was possible, and I had never wanted a different standard. I wanted the same one. That is, in the end, all I had ever wanted. What I carry from that Tuesday 6 months later is not the image of Marcus's face when James said partner. That image exists and it is vivid, but it is not what stays with me. What stays with me is the photograph on the east wall. My 29-year-old self, second from the left, laughing at something James said, holding a cup of coffee that was probably also cold by then, in a warehouse that smelled of construction adhesive and ambition, standing at the beginning of something I could not yet fully see. My mother in her kitchen asking about the plan. I'm building toward something. She had known. She had carried that knowing quietly, the way she carried most things, and she had died before I could show her what it became, and that is the loss that does not resolve. Not with 31%, not with a board presentation, not with my brother standing in a lobby suddenly understanding the geography of a room he'd walked into thinking he knew it. My mother is not here to see what I built. That is the thing I set down gently every morning and pick up again at night. Not bitterness. Not grief exactly anymore. Something closer to a promise made to someone who can't receive it, kept anyway every day because the keeping is the only conversation left. James says I should write something about it someday. The architecture of it. What it means to build a thing in quiet, to carry your own proof before anyone asks for it. Maybe I will. For now there's work. There is Keisha with her diplomatically raised eyebrows. There is Sujin asking real questions over bad coffee. There is my father cooking elaborate meals for himself in the house where we all grew up, calling on Tuesday evenings saying more than he used to. There is Marcus somewhere in the process being evaluated like anyone else. There is the city outside the 14th floor window doing what cities do. And there is the tea which I should really start drinking before it goes cold again.